In the early days of World War II, the B-25 Mitchell entered combat as a medium bomber meant for precision strikes. Yet, reality proved harsh. Japanese Zeros and anti-aircraft fire cut through its formations with staggering ease, leaving crews vulnerable and morale shaken. What began as a promising bomber soon seemed destined for disaster. But necessity, innovation, and raw courage would drive the B-25's transformation from an easy target into a legendary warbird. When the B-25 Mitchell first arrived in Australia during early 1942, bomber crews had little time to adjust. Many had logged only a handful of training flights before being thrown directly into combat against one of the most aggressive air forces of the war. In theory, medium-altitude bombing runs at 10,000 to 12,000 feet, allowed for precision strikes while staying above light flak. In practice, Japanese gunners and agile Mitsubishi Zero interceptors devastated formations. Escort fighters, crucial for bomber survival, often failed to provide protection. The available P-39 Airacobras and P-40 Warhawks lacked the fuel capacity to accompany B-25s deep into enemy-held territory. As a result, Mitchell crews were left exposed during the most dangerous phase of their missions, the final approach to heavily defended targets. With no escorts and limited defensive armament, bomber attrition rates climbed alarmingly. Accounts from raids over New Guinea describe missions where 1/3 of the attacking bombers never returned. Pilots often released their bombs prematurely under intense fire or were forced to abort entirely when their formations were shredded. Even when aircraft made it back, many limped home riddled with bullet holes, leaking fuel and carrying wounded or dead crew members. This sobering baptism by fire forced US commanders to confront a grim truth. The B-25, as designed, could not survive traditional bombing doctrine in the Pacific theater. If crews continued flying by the book, losses would eventually cripple the campaign. The Mitchell's survival depended on adaptation, and for its men, every sortie meant improvisation and desperate courage in skies where conventional tactics meant certain death. By mid-1942, it was clear the B-25 could not endure at medium altitude. Crews facing staggering losses began experimenting with tactics well outside official doctrine. Instead of flying at 10,000 feet, pilots dropped to treetop level, hoping to evade radar and minimize time exposed to anti-aircraft fire. While this drastically reduced vulnerability to heavy flak, it introduced a new set of perils that proved equally deadly. Flying just a few hundred feet above the ground or sea brought bombers into range of small arms and rapid-fire guns, which were devastatingly effective against aircraft with large profiles. Japanese defenders quickly adapted, setting up concealed positions along coastlines, riverbanks, and jungle clearings to catch incoming Mitchells at point-blank range. At such low altitude, even a single well-placed burst could tear through control surfaces, puncture fuel tanks, or incapacitate a crew. One notorious raid in April 1942 highlighted both the promise and danger of this shift. Out of 18 B-25s sent against targets in New Guinea, 6 failed to return, a staggering 30% loss. Survivors reported that while bombs struck with greater accuracy, the approach and escape were gauntlets of fire. Low-level tactics increased the psychological strain on crews, forcing them to stare directly into the muzzles of enemy guns with virtually no margin for error. Still, results began to justify the risks. Bombs delivered from lower altitudes struck closer to their targets, damaging critical infrastructure and shipping. Commanders who once dismissed such unorthodox methods began to see low-level attacks as the only viable option in the Pacific's unforgiving environment. For the B-25, these desperate improvisations marked the beginning of its evolution from vulnerable bomber into something far more formidable. Desperation often breeds innovation, and nowhere was this truer than in the Pacific skies of 1942. Among the men flying B-25s, none was more influential than Major Paul "Pappy" Gunn, a former Navy pilot and mechanic with a reputation for bold ideas. He recognized that survival required not only flying lower but also hitting harder. His radical proposal: strip away the bomber's traditional glass nose and replace it with heavy, forward-firing firepower. At first, the concept seemed reckless. Bombers were supposed to drop bombs, not strafe ships and ground targets like fighters. Yet Gunn understood that a bomber diving into intense fire needed to neutralize defenses before releasing its payload. He began modifying B-25s by hand, using sheet metal, rivets, and ingenuity to construct solid noses packed with Browning .50 caliber machine guns. In some cases, as many as 8 guns were mounted in the nose alone, with additional weapons added to the sides. Each weapon fired 750 rounds per minute, creating a storm of lead capable of shredding ships, disabling anti-aircraft positions, and cutting down enemy aircraft before they could strike. This transformed the Mitchell from a vulnerable bomber into a fearsome attacker capable of blasting open paths for its own survival. Initial skepticism within the US Army Air Forces was strong. Many officers dismissed the conversions as a waste of valuable bombers. But General George Kenney, newly in command of the 5th Air Force, saw promise. He overruled critics and authorized more of Gunn's conversions. The gamble was enormous, sacrificing scarce bombers for untested modifications, but it paid off. Gunn's vision gave the B-25 a new lease on life, setting the stage for its legendary role as a gunship. Turning Gunn's vision into reality was anything but simple. The B-25 was never designed to carry a solid nose bristling with heavy machine guns, and no factory tools or assembly lines were available in New Guinea. Instead, mechanics and engineers improvised under brutal conditions. Jungle workshops were little more than open-air huts, with mud floors, salvaged parts, and sheet metal hammered into shape by hand. Crews scavenged aluminum from wrecked aircraft and riveted it together, fashioning custom noses capable of holding multiple Browning .50 caliber guns. Every modification was a gamble. Adding so much firepower shifted the aircraft's center of gravity forward, which risked instability in flight. Crews had to carefully balance ammunition storage and weight distribution, often through trial and error. Even test firing was dangerous. Vibration from 4, 6, or 8 heavy machine guns firing simultaneously threatened to shake wiring loose, crack plexiglass panels, or even tear the nose apart. Ground crews watched nervously each time pilots squeezed the triggers, unsure whether the modifications would hold under strain. Yet necessity pushed them forward. There was no alternative if the B-25 was to survive Pacific combat. Crews worked through monsoon rains and oppressive heat, often under threat of enemy air raids, to complete the conversions. Many of these mechanics had no formal training in aeronautical engineering, but their determination and creativity overcame shortages and uncertainty. These improvised conversions became the backbone of a new tactical doctrine. By late 1942, units were deploying B-25s equipped with as many as a dozen forward-firing guns, dramatically shifting how the bomber operated. What began as jungle ingenuity quickly evolved into a proven strategy, an airborne gun platform that could attack head-on, shred defenses, and then unleash bombs with devastating accuracy. The B-25 was no longer just a bomber, it was becoming a predator. March 1943 offered the crucible that would prove whether the modified B-25s could truly change the course of the air war. A massive Japanese convoy, consisting of 8 troop transports and 4 destroyers carrying nearly 7,000 reinforcements, attempted to reach New Guinea. If successful, the Allied foothold in the region would be threatened. The mission to stop it fell to the newly converted B-25 strafers, now armed with unprecedented forward firepower. Flying at barely 200 feet above the sea, Mitchells roared into the convoy. Their nose-mounted 50-caliber machine guns blazed, suppressing anti-aircraft gunners and sweeping decks clear of defenders. This firestorm created the opening needed for another revolutionary tactic: skip bombing. Pilots released bombs so low that they skipped across the water like flat stones, slamming into hulls just above the waterline where armor was weakest. The results were devastating. Within hours, transports and escorting destroyers erupted in flames, broken apart by the combined fury of strafing fire and low-level bombing. Japanese gunners, overwhelmed by the concentrated streams of lead, were unable to mount an effective defense. The convoy was annihilated, with only a handful of ships surviving long enough to rescue survivors. Nearly 3,000 Japanese troops were lost, crippling Japan's ability to reinforce the front. The success of the Battle of the Bismarck Sea stunned both sides. For the Allies, it validated the dangerous low-level tactics and proved that guns' modifications worked in combat. For Washington and North American aviation, it marked the turning point where improvised jungle conversions would evolve into factory-standard production models. The Mitchell had not only survived its baptism, but had emerged as one of the most formidable strike aircraft of the Pacific War. The spectacular success at the Battle of the Bismarck Sea forced both the U.S. Army Air Forces and North American aviation to rethink the B-25's role. No longer just a medium-altitude bomber, the aircraft had proven itself as a devastating low-level gunship. What began as improvised jungle engineering soon became a blueprint for factory-standard production. By mid-1943, the B-25G rolled off assembly lines, the first official model to carry a solid nose designed specifically for forward firepower. The B-25G housed the formidable 75mm M4 cannon, the same weapon fitted to Sherman tanks. Alongside the cannon, two 50-caliber Browning machine guns in the nose and several more mounted in cheek positions gave the aircraft incredible striking power. In theory, the M4 could destroy ships and harden targets with a single shot, a capability that no other bomber of its class possessed. In practice, however, the weapon introduced major challenges. The cannon's recoil was bone-jarring, shaking the aircraft so violently that rivets loosened and plexiglass panels cracked. Each shell had to be hand-loaded by the navigator, who wrestled with the 15-pound ammunition under combat conditions, slowing the rate of fire to 1 round per minute at best. Accuracy was inconsistent, as small, evasive maneuvers by ships often caused shells to miss their mark. While the concept of a bomber armed with a tank cannon was bold, many crews found the weapon impractical compared to the steady, devastating streams of 50-caliber fire. Recognizing these limitations, North American refined the design further, introducing the B-25H in 1944. This version replaced the M4 with the lighter T-13E1 cannon and dramatically increased the number of machine guns. With up to 8 fixed forward-firing 50-caliber guns in the nose, plus additional mounts in the waist and tail, the B-25H became a true airborne fortress. Some field-modified versions carried as many as 14 to 18 guns, rivaling the combined firepower of multiple fighters. By now, the Mitchell had completed its transformation. What started as a vulnerable bomber barely surviving its missions had evolved into a specialized strike aircraft designed to smash ships, strafe airfields, and annihilate ground positions with overwhelming firepower. The factory had caught up with the field, and the B-25 was ready to define its legacy. By the final years of World War II, the B-25 Mitchell had shed its reputation as an easy target and earned its place as a legend. No longer bound by the limitations of traditional bomber doctrine, it became the cornerstone of Allied strike tactics in the Pacific. Flying at treetop level, bristling with machine guns and guided by daring crews, the Mitchell demonstrated that ingenuity could transform vulnerability into dominance. Its versatility was unmatched. Beyond anti-shipping strikes, B-25 strafed airfields, supply depots, and enemy convoys. They supported ground forces in New Guinea and the Philippines, disrupting Japanese reinforcements and crippling infrastructure. The low-level, head-on attacks were brutal to fly, demanding nerves of steel, but they delivered results that reshaped the air campaign. By war's end, the Mitchell had proven itself in every major Pacific theater and left an indelible mark on U.S. air strategy. The gunship concept, pioneered by Major Pappy Gunn and embraced by General George Kenney, also influenced future aircraft development. The idea that bombers could combine precision bombing with overwhelming strafing fire opened doors for later close air support aircraft, most notably the A-26 Invader and, decades later, the iconic A-10 Thunderbolt II. The B-25's transformation showed that the rigid division between bomber and fighter roles could be blurred to devastating effect. Equally important was the symbolic value of the Mitchell. Crews who had once faced near-certain loss in 1942 found themselves flying aircraft capable of not only surviving but dominating the battlefield. Its evolution embodied the larger story of the Pacific War: improvisation, adaptation, and relentless determination, turning early setbacks into decisive victories. By the time production ceased, nearly 10,000 B-25s had been built, serving in every theater and with multiple Allied air forces. Yet it was in the Pacific, through its metamorphosis into a flying gun platform, that the B-25 cemented its legendary status. The aircraft that began as a liability ended as one of the war's most formidable and versatile tools, a warbird reborn through necessity, vision, and the courage of its crews. The story of the B-25. Mitchell is more than just a tale of engineering upgrades. It is a testament to the relentless spirit of adaptation that defined the Allied war effort in the Pacific. What began as a bomber ill-suited for its environment became, through necessity and daring, one of the most feared strike aircraft of World War II. Every stage of its evolution, improvised jungle modifications, factory-standard gunships, and combat-tested tactics, was driven not by comfort, but by survival. At its core, the Mitchell's transformation is about people as much as machines. Mechanics hammering makeshift noses out of scrap metal, pilots daring to skim the sea at 200 feet, navigators manually loading cannon shells under fire, each contributed to the rebirth of the aircraft. Without their ingenuity and courage, the B-25 would likely have remained a footnote in aviation history, remembered for its vulnerabilities rather than its triumphs. Instead, it became a legend. The Mitchell demonstrated that when doctrine fails, innovation can prevail, and that even in the darkest days, determination can turn weakness into overwhelming strength. Its impact did not end with the war. The lessons of the B-25 influenced decades of close air support and strike aircraft that followed. From the desperate skies of 1942 to the victorious formations of 1945, the B-25, Mitchell stands as a symbol of transformation. Once an easy target, it rose to legendary status, not just as a warplane, but as a reminder of what resilience and ingenuity can achieve.